What I would like to do is, there's been quite a focus on the what so far. So basically what the SDGs are, what we've been doing, and a little bit of the how we're going to be monitoring the progress through the statistics. What I want to do is focus on the how. One of the major, when we start looking at the lessons learned from the MDG, one of the things that we realize are two things. One is we didn't pay enough attention to the how. And as part of that is we didn't pay attention to the impact of the economic framework, the economic, financial, trade framework in which each of our countries are operating that enable or hinder the progress that we can make on education, on health, and other issues. And increasingly, that policy space is getting restricted by some of these international treaties, especially those on investment, that reduce that policy and fiscal space for our government to achieve some of these objectives, to put in place the policies, the national policies that would actually allow you to achieve them. So that's what I want to focus on. I'm going to do that by going quickly over the various processes and the various documents have been produced to document this, and then talk about the hot issues, because hot issues are always cool. So from the MDGs, as I said, we learned that we need to talk about the how right up front. We need to talk about economics. We need to talk about the policies. And we also, and this has been alluded by Minh-Thu, we can't just focus on social. The social issues depend on how many jobs you have in the countries, how good your education system is, the transportation to get to the health clinic, and everything else. If you have water, clean water, so you can't just focus on social. You have to have access to technology. You have to have a well-working financial system. You have to have a productive capacity in the country so you actually can create jobs, so people can actually make a living for themselves and not have to depend on ODA or anything else. And also, I will make a point, and I'm sure that Tracy is going to make it way more strongly than I do, that you need to integrate a three-dimension of sustainable development. You no longer can talk about, oh, it's either development or it's sustainable development. You will hear still some people talking about, even at the beginning, after Rio, people were talking about, well, now we have SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, but we still have the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. We need the two sets of goals, which would have been a nightmare. And increasingly, it is clear that we can't achieve the poverty alleviation, we can't achieve the social issues without the addressing the environmental issues and the economic issues at the same time. And therefore, the three needs to be addressed together. Why am I here? I work at UNCTAD for the last 3 months. I'm very excited about that. I'm the chief of the New York office. And UNCTAD actually works on the how. What we do within the UN system, we have a mandate to work on trade and development and related issues of finance, economics, investment, debt issues, sovereign debt issues. So that's what we do, which is very exciting for me. A lot of people find it boring. But honestly, if you don't address these issues, and people here would get this in this room, but usually people turn their eye when you talk about investment, when debt restructuring. I don't even deal with my own investment. I'm not going to start thinking about my own country's investment. But it is very important. And also, for this reason, what UNCTAD has done throughout our history, we were created at the same time as G77 in China, which is the group of developing countries, and now they, as a bloc, negotiate at the UN. Right in the 60s, when the African countries were decolonizing, joining an international trade and economic system that was developed without them at the table, and trying to see how they could fit within the system in a way that they could actually catch up and would be fair for them, as well as the Latin American countries and the other countries that still needed to be integrated and fair play. So we came up with the idea of preferential duty-free entry into the system and the WTO and its predecessors, the classification of the least developing countries having special needs, the SIDS countries, small island development countries that have specific constraints that need to be addressed, as well as other issues such as creation of World Association investment promotion agencies to facilitate investment in productive capacities in the less developed countries. The concept of policy space, as I said at the beginning, this idea that you need to have enough freedom within your government to be able to put in place the right policy. Why do we focus on that? Because there's a trade-off. When you try to attract foreign direct investment, you will join these international treaties on finance. You will trade these trade agreements that will require you to do certain things. some of these things will limit your ability. So what is the right trade-off? So you can attract the FDI, but you attract an FDI that's quality FDI that will create jobs, will have a multiplier effect in the countries, that will not only reach the rich in the country, will also reach the poorer in the country and create jobs in the areas where maybe poverty is more located. So basically, this whole idea of a trade-off and what type of what is it that you give in and what is it that you gain? And this needs to be at the table and not just joining trade agreement for the sake of joining trade agreement because it's in fashion. Or because trade is good. We believe trade is good, but all trade is not created equal. And all trade is not created equal, doesn't mean the same thing for different countries at different level of development as well. If you have an infant industry, you open your door completely, this industry have very little chance to compete with the transnational or the other company that have been established for 150 years. So there's this whole idea of how do you treat these issues over time as the country develop. So basically, not going to do more promotion, but just wanted to raise these issues. We've been talking about these SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, which have 17 goals, 169 targets. 42 targets are related to means of implementation, because the G77 and China have insisted that we're not only going to have one goal, which is goal 17, the last one, on having strengthened means of implementation and revitalizing that global partnership, because we know, as was said by the previous two speakers, it kind of worked and kind of didn't work, and therefore we want to have specific means of implementation for each of the goals, so we can start thinking about what is it required to achieve that one goal as an international community, but also at the domestic level. And also we have to remember that 193 countries have agreed to these goals. That means that this is still a political compromise. And it's a very good compromise. Even the member state, even the negotiators of the process are surprised by how ambitious these goals are. Nobody going into it believed that these would be that ambitious. This is a window of opportunity. We have very few of them in our lifetime. This is one to be grabbed. So what are the goals? Well, under goal 17, we have the finance one, which is, as I was saying, not all the MDGs have been achieved. One of them was 0.7 of the of GNE would have gone to ODA, Overseas Development Aid. We never say these words anymore. Official development aid to developing countries. Most countries did not achieve that target. That was a clear target that was in the agreement. And therefore, a lot of developing countries are saying, well, we did not reach the MDGs because we did not have the resources to invest in achieving them. There's also a strengthened domestic resource mobilization clause in there with the capacity to increase tax collection. If you look at the ability and the percentage of the developing countries' ability to tax their citizen and their companies and the total revenue they can extract as a percentage of developed versus developing country, it's way less. They don't have the institution in place. They don't have the RRS that go and knock on your door and ensure that you pay and throw you in jail if you don't. Here, people are afraid of the RRS. In a lot of these countries, the institution are not there to achieve that. And therefore, the tax collection is not very good. There's also two problems. There's a huge illicit flow of capitals through personal wealth being invested in offshore paradise, as well as transnational companies playing with creative accountability to avoid paying taxes in most countries, if not all. So that reduced the capacity of countries to increase revenue that they could invest then in the SDGs. And then also assist developing countries in attaining long-term debt sustainability. Why debt sustainability? How many of you have heard of the New York court decision against Argentina debt restructuring holdout? Okay, you need to look at that. This is a huge issue. Basically, countries take debt, issue bonds, eventually they can't pay them, they have to go to a debt restructuring. Some of the creditors that lended the money may decide they don't want to restructure the debt. And these hold out. They're basically, so Argentina in this case had agreed with 93% of its creditors, and they were paying them. And the court is basically saying now, no, that you need to pay full, these 7% hold out, you need to pay them in full and stop paying the others until you pay these. That means that Argentina now can't pay the other ones, and probably doesn't have the capacity to pay all of them. And a lot of small developing countries are facing similar issues. So this old debt restructuring, again, if you're putting that money into, oh, what are we going to do? Now this means this investment in schools, in health, in water, and infrastructure is not going there, because it's going to repay a debt at terms that were not perceived. There's this multi-stakeholder partnership, but I've been told my time is running out, so I'm not going to go into deep into this. There's, as I said, the G77 insisted on having means of implementation under each of the goal. What I want to show by these, and I just look at the yellow stuff in here, what you see is the mean of implementation is way, way more broad than finance or investment. And we actually don't even talk about finance, because finance is just money, it's capital. Investment is targeted channel money going into a specific use, and ensuring that that use, and then maybe an end user. And why the data revolution is important is because we need to disaggregate. When we look at the MDGs, yes, we reduced poverty by 50%. But did we reach the poorest of the poor? No, we didn't. Do we have the statistic to follow on how we're doing with the bottom of the pyramid? No, we don't. So basically, in the SDGs, member states have said we will not consider that we've achieved the goal until we have achieved the goal for the most marginalized, the women, the indigenous people, people with disability, a whole set of people that were pretty much left behind when we started monitoring progress on the MDGs. Infrastructure development and others, I'm going to skip these. So basically what we have now, and I'm sure you've all seen it, is this report of the Intergovernmental Committee of Experts on Sustainable Development Financing that has basically provided a toolkit of, here are some options that you can use to start looking at how you can finance these SDGs, and providing an international policy architecture of how you might want to start thinking about doing that. What they've done is estimate also what it may cost to achieve some of these goals. We're talking about serious money, and these are very broad estimates. It's really hard to estimate these things, as you can imagine, country by country, sector by sector, you aggregate those. But pretty much we're talking of billions and trillions of dollars, depending of which sector you're looking at, and that doesn't even cover Tracy's sector, which is all these public goods: climate change, adaptation, mitigation, water, ocean cleaning up, deacidification, etc., etc. And what the report concludes, though, is despite all these high numbers, the cost of inaction is even higher than the cost of action. What we've done, and this is a report I highly recommend you read, on the World Investment Report 2014 from UNCTAD, we have a full chapter on investment in the SDGs. And what we've done there is to look at what is the cost, the total cost of, in the major sectors, to meet the SDGs, which is estimated about 3.9 trillion a year. We also look at what is being invested right now. It's about 1.4 trillion. That means we have a gap of $2.5 trillion to meet the SDGs. That's a huge number, we all agree. But the bottom line is we're saying it's not a number that is unachievable. But we have to have a complementarity between ODA and private investment. And private investment that is of quality and targeted, not just any foreign direct investment. So this is basically something that is in the report as well, that looks at the darker columns are what is currently invested in each of these sectors by the private sector. And then the lighter bar is what potentially could be invested by the private sector in each of these areas. And then basically we look at the source of finance that are available, that could be channeled, mobilized and channels towards these SDGs. And you see that you have the FDI, which is the green at the bottom, the portfolio investment, that's your bond and your market, the other investments, mainly bank loan, the ODA, and the remittances. And you can see remittances is huge. And during the financial crisis, if you look, most people had to rely on remittances because everything else was going down. So what is the level of these capital that exist out there? They're huge. Bank asset, pension fund, insurance companies, transnational corporation, and then sovereign wealth fund. These are huge numbers. The thing is, very few of these, except for the transnational corporation, goes to developing countries. Most of these investments are still in developed countries. And the question is, how do you, again, get this trade-off between attracting these investments while maintaining an ability for you to develop the policies that you need to achieve these goals? Both reports go through a multi-part financing framework for sustainable development, and they basically look at sources, the enabling environment that you need to have in your country, and then the uses of this money to achieve the 3 dimensions of sustainable development. What we do in the report is then look at a structure that will, specific issues that would go into, we have the framework as 4 levels. It's basically having the right leadership at the country level and the international level, mobilization of the resources, channeling the resources in the SDGs, and then having the impact. If you invest in the poor, you have a different impact than if you invest generally. If you invest for the poor, you have a different impact if you invest generally. So there are specific examples here that we give in terms of how to improve the investment into these sectors. We also believe there needs to be a big push. You can't just wait for FDI and investment to happen. You actually need to work at the domestic and international level to have those happening, and yet you need guiding principle. We can't kid ourselves. The private sector's goals are not the same as the public sector's goal, and they need to be principled to align these two at some point if you want to have a convergence of those. And I want to say, because I'm not going to be remiss to not say that the ODA continue to be important. As I mentioned, very few of the indirect investment goes into developing countries. Therefore, this public aid still need to happen. It still need to go to these developed countries. And middle-income countries, increasingly Latin American countries, are feeling like we're focusing so much on least developed countries that we're forgetting about the middle-income countries, and they're still going to need help. Capacity building, bankable projects, technical cooperation, international partnership, coalition to achieve those goals. It's not just going to be the least developed countries. We have a process called Financing for Development that is ongoing right now, which is preparing for the 3rd conference of the Financing for Development, which was basically an agreement about how we're going to help developing countries, especially the least developed countries. It was agreed while we were negotiating the SDGs that we would have that conference before the summit of the post-2015 to see how this conference could contribute to the means of implementation for the post-2015 development agenda. I'm not sure, I'm probably running out of time. Is it? Oh yeah, I'll stop. I'll stop with the hot issues, and we'll do the hot issue later during the question time. Thank you.